order the regular meeting of the Committee on Ordinance. The members present are myself, Ward Councillor Terry Murphy, representing Ward 2, Councillor Vacon, representing Ward 5, Libby Hernandez, representing Ward 4, and Juan Anderson Burgos from Ward 6 sent me a note saying he had a family incident come up and may be joining late, but he's not with us at the moment. All those in favor of moving ahead to item number 1 and taking it off the table and opening or continuing the public hearing, in favor?
So moved.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor? Sorry.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we are open for item number 1, which is, let me just read it into the record and then I'll turn it over to you, John. Item number 1 is a joint public hearing of the Ordinance Committee and Planning Board that in an effort to enhance food access and security for our residents during these uncertain times, that we expedite a backyard chicken ordinance as well as review of the permitting process for community gardens to ensure that it facilitates easy access and use of such sites. Okay, we are open and on the record here.
Thank you. Entertain a motion to reconvene, reopen the public hearing, the joint public hearing with the Planning Board and the Ordinance Committee to take up a zoned text change for backyard chickens, introduced by Councillor Lisi.
So moved.
And community gardens.
And community gardens.
Take up community gardens also.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 So we're all set. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to begin the discussion, I know that I used some sloppy language when I filed the order. They should really be separated out as 2 distinct orders. I think for the duration of our conversations here, we have been focusing on the hen ordinance. And I know that community gardens have come up in relation to the hen ordinance, but I don't think that any public speakers, anyone from the public, has come to speak about the community gardens ordinance. So I do want to note that as the maker of the order, I will be filing something separate, and I'm quite satisfied, and I believe that the public would be satisfied if we sort of remained focused on the hen ordinance as opposed to the 2 hen ordinance and community garden piece together. So I just like to state that for the record and see if anyone objects to us focusing only on one half of the language as we have been.
So I take it there's no legal problem with just doing half of this, even though it says community gardens, because that does seem to be an easier approach.
I think that there's no legal problem with it in that we noticed it properly and we haven't had any public comment on it. And so I think that we've gave it its due notice. I do see a hand from Councillor Vacon, I think, on this point. So if you'd like.
Thank you, Councillor Lisi. I would only note that since the public hearing is open for both, when we close it, it will have the effect of closing for both, and any action that we take, I mean, it may just make the fact that the garden issue is there a moot point, but it will just be open and closed together because that's how it's written. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
I do think that proceeding along this line will probably make it a lot smoother.
Yeah.
In the end, we've got a lot of input already on the on the backyard chickens, and I think as Councilor Lisi stated, we really haven't done anything relative to community gardens yet. So
yeah, moving this along.
You'll probably proceed as she suggested.
Right, and I think what needs to happen in that case is I think I need to work with whether it's the building department or the Board of Health to figure out what the current process is, and then take it from there. And I think that could happen as a conversation with our department heads as opposed to the public forum here. So staying focused on the hen ordinance, I circulated 3 documents. Sharon, can you remind me, are we using chat? I do see chat, yep. Let me upload these files so that they are part of the public record, and anyone who's joining can see them. let's see if this will work. So actually, since I'm chairing, and this seems to be a little bit more complicated than what I was anticipating, could I ask Cynthia, do you have a copy of the, Cynthia Espinoza, do you have a copy of the documents that I sent around?
Yes, I do.
Thanks. Do you mind taking charge of just uploading those documents for the public record into the chat?
I can do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so there's 3 documents that have been circulated. They're all in draft form. One is the ordinance. One is the Board of Health regulations, and then there's a Board of Health application. And I think very much that the application is not something that we need to, approve. Additionally, the Board of Health regulations are something that we don't pass via ordinance. It's something that is an internal document to the Board of Health, and they would be able to change and amend that as they see fit over time, as best practices change and what have you. But the ordinance needs to be A, comprehensive enough so that we know how to regulate and enforce those regulations. And then B, refer to that Board of Health document on what the regulations are where appropriate. And then finally, what we don't have before us that would be related to this here are the actual text changes to the zoning ordinance for accessory structures, accessory uses. So in total, we would be looking at 4 documents, and only 2 would require a passage by these 2 separate bodies. And then the other 2 would sort of be referenced and to be very transparent about what we're passing here. Does that sound like it makes sense to everybody that's been participating so far?
Counselor, can I just cut you off for a minute?
Yep.
Sharon messaged saying that she lost the ability to record.
Okay.
So can we make sure that somebody is getting this on record?
Ryan, is there the ability for you to record?
You're being automatically recorded. We're still on channel 15, and a record is being generated by Scott from Holyoke Media, so we should be all set in that regard.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So Linda, is that your hand up on this new item?
Well, I just wanted to confirm that the documents you're referring to are the ones that we received around noon today, or is that a different set?
No, I think what we need to do is look at these documents and figure out how they work together, or at least confirm for legal and Board of Health that we expect the documents to work together. And if they're not quite there, then I think that we could have a relatively short meeting on the hen ordinance.
But those are the ones that we received today at noon, because I was at work, so I haven't had a chance to look at them.
Right, they're just tools for our conversation here today.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then let's start with Board of Health Director Sean Gonsalves. Thank you for being with us tonight, Sean. Would you mind, have you, in creating the Board of Health regulations, did you create them? I guess I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to know already if there are conflicts, or if you created them already with the scaffolding that the ordinance that Crystal provided? And I'm not sure, but it seems like the regulations may be redundant to the ordinance. So I don't know if you have that set up so that your Board of Health regulations doc is referencing the ordinance. Could you just speak to a little bit about what the thinking went into the organization here?
Yeah, so the redundancy is planned, and the reason being is that by nature of the discussions we've had previously, the Board of Health is going to have to enforce most of these provisions. I think it's clear from some of the language in the ordinance that the zoning section of this is the purview of the building commissioner, who's also the zoning officer. And so that will not be the Board of Health's section for enforcement. But the reason that a lot of this language is duplicated here is for really two reasons. One, it's transparent to the person who's drawing a permit what the expectations are, and kind of clears up many of the points of inspection that are going to be taking place. And that was one of the requests in the ordinance, is that we clear up what the inspection protocol is going to be. Well, the regulations, coupled with on the application, there's a questionnaire section, are a very simple way for someone who is constructing a coop, a run, to see what we're going to be looking for. And so you can flip to if you look at the document that is the Board of Health regulations, the front page is the very clear procedure for application. And then the back is the regulations that we'd be looking to enforce, which I would say is 80% of part of the ordinance anyway. And then you as the homeowner or tenant would be able to easily walk through this and understand what we're looking for. And then when it comes time for inspections or permitting, there's not really any, confusion about what we're looking for or where the ordinance is. It's right there. And then the inspector, typically the animal inspector, can also use this as a tool for reference at every inspection that's clear and readily available to the public, because it's part of the application.
Okay. And then of the 21 points here, just because the ordinance language is not numbered in the same way, are these 21 points directly from and in the same order as the ordinance, or are there items that are particular to this document?
So there's a few things in here that are particular to this document. There's the mention of the farm fresh eggs being stored at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. There's also the mention of what the hearing authority would be for appeals. If we made a decision, for instance, that that's point number 21, that chickens were to be removed, we would allow for an appeal. And then that clearly defines what the authority is. We learned through our dangerous dog hearings about how helpful it is to have what the hearing authority is in absolute clear language. And then for the most part, some of it just has to do with the authority of the Board of Health. So if you look at number 20, that clarifies that if there are issues, that we may remove the hens from the property. That could be cockfighting, it could be animal abuse, it could be that they've been let loose on city property. Whatever it is, we're trying to articulate the enforcement authority as clearly as possible. And I don't know that that is on the ordinance, and I don't know that it needs to be written out, but I do think it's important to clarify that there are two agencies which are going to have some inspectional authority here, and that their authority is overlapping but separate and to different parts of it. And then I would just say on the front part of the regulatory document, under item 6, that specifies the summary of the application process. Item 6 really lays out what is a fairly basic process in all of our permitting, which is application, inspection of the requested application, and then again, just mentions fines up to $100, which is pretty standard throughout many of the other ordinances, and specifies how violations are to be considered. And so that's there just to clarify some points of the ordinance.
Yep, great. Crystal, have you been able to look over the Board of Health regulations?
I did. So there's a lot of overlap. What I ended up doing was taking the draft that had been started and kind of tearing into that a little bit as far as some language and finessing it. But as far as putting it into an organized document, that's much more of what the Board of Health regs have done. So now I think the decision is where we want the ordinance to stop and where we want the regulations to start. So I think it's going to ultimately be three pieces to this. You're going to have the zoning regulation, which I think I sent you a draft from the planning department. And so you'll have a quick zoning piece where you're going to have to change tables. There's going to be the ordinance, which might make sense to keep kind of short and sweet as far as some of the numerical situations, the size of the run, the coop, the amount of chickens, the setbacks, things of that nature. And then let the regs really get into more of the details as Sean's laid out. So it's kind of still a lot of drafting and figuring out where we want certain points to go, because I think the regs are going to be a lot easier to change as we get involved in this and actually putting this into practice versus coming back and trying to change an ordinance over and over. So some of the more concrete things I think should stay in the ordinance. The more detailed things and more Board of Health specific, soil testing and health, safety, welfare of the animals, et cetera, might make more sense in the regs. So some of it still needs a lot of finessing, I think. But I definitely I like the format. As you can see, I did a full red line. That's usually what the council likes to see when we're changing things. So I left it that way. But we can do a full cleanup. I can work with Sean to kind of sort out what makes more sense where, and go from there. We've come across a couple of other points that maybe haven't been touched on yet. For instance, we go and
highlight those for us so that we can take note of it.
Yep. So we go into detail about the coop and the run, but we don't say that it's required. So then it's a conversation of whether or not, if you just have something with a roof on it, is that considered a coop? If you have, a fenced in area, is that sufficient? Is any accessory structure that sort of fits the definition going to work? So I guess the idea being, do you have to have a coop? Can you just have chickens kind of free range in the backyard, assuming that there's a fence? It's just kind of a gray area. So maybe a sentence about, you are required to have a coop and a run if that's what you're going for. There's also the thought of whether or not, so we speak to the fact that the hens can't be in residential structure. So in your residence, does a garage count? Does your back porch count? If your run is nearby, say your back porch, are the chickens allowed up and around in your back porch area? The thought being, if you have a larger building and now you have sort of these common areas where there's stairs up the back, and the chickens now start to wander, kind of some regulations on that. And then something that had come up in our later conversations, and by ours, I've been talking to Sean as well as Eric, our animal control officer, about this kind of in depth as we were writing these and putting them into sort of a final version. What about violations? There's, obviously going to be issues that come up, and what does that violation procedure look like as far as the first offense, tickets, the removal of the animals or revocation of the special permit? How do they get them back? Do they get them back? Those sort of things. And then I know some of the Board of Health regulations we had discussed early on were the lighting and the soil testing. I don't recall if they were in depth in the Board of Health regulations as they're written right now.
No,
and
I think
Sean's shaking his head no. So
I think we decided there that we wanted to provide resources, but not make it a requirement.
Okay. So I don't know if some of those links should come out in, if there are resources, should that be delineated in the Board of Health regs? That sort of thing. And then as far as electrical with the lights, can you run electrical out? What about heated water bowls, that sort of thing? So there's still a lot of questions that keep coming up the more in depth we get into this. And then, what happens, we had talked today about, and I know Sean touched on it as well, what about, dangerous dog hearings? Is there also going to be hearing should something happen to the chickens from, a loose dog, a loose cat, I guess. I don't know. What happens if these fences that are being constructed, what happens if they're not foolproof and something happens to the chickens? How do we deal with complaints from the neighbors, those sort of hearings situations?
Okay. The one thing that I'll note is that I definitely think from our conversations here, we do expect the coop and the run to be required, and that there shouldn't be any reason for chickens to wander into common areas, because they should be limited to the run as far as I understand. Now, people may want to comment on that tonight, but that's how I understood things. I do see Sean's hand up, Linda, and Christine Burns. Will go in that order.
So I just a couple of points in response to some of the questions. Crystal, I think on the Board of Health Regulations, if you look at, you may be able to tweak that sentence a little bit. Right now it says, hens shall not be kept within the living area of the residential structure or any indoor common area, kind of in reference to hallways of shared units. And we could easily clarify that phrase to address any exterior structure that we don't think is appropriate, or porches. I think that was an easy addendum. And then there was one other one about the lighting. You asked about the electrical and like the water heaters. Just something simple in here. Number 5 on the regulations: structures shall meet all building code requirements. Structures with electrical or plumbing shall require appropriate permits. And that was sort of I thought that would be an adequate blanket to sort of cover if people wanted to go above and beyond instead of getting super in depth. It's just that if you're going to add any structures, it has to be in accordance with state requirements. If that needs to be edited a little more, I think that would be the place to add any more acute restrictions.
I think I agree there. We want to keep the details in the Board of Health regulations, but sort of like the larger, the where, when sort of questions are being addressed by the ordinance, and then the details of how would be covered by the regulation document. Linda, do you want to ask a question or comment here?
Yes, my question is around input from the immediate abutters relative to the granting of the special permit, since we are considering making the lot area much smaller than it currently is in the ordinance. And it would seem that there would need to be the ability of the immediate abutters to have some input in this process.
Mm-hmm. We did talk about noticing abutters in the same way that we would notice for any other like public hearing, like within 300 feet. But we didn't say how, like if it would be a sort of, like I know we send certified mail or something like that. Sean, in your application document?
Yes, I do. So what we specifically said is that we would require a copy of a certified letter, copy of signed return receipt to each property abutter informing them of your application to keep hens, or receipt showing notice was hand delivered and received by abutters. And then it also says on the application, I'm sorry, give me one moment here.
I'm looking for that section and I'm just not seeing it. Can you help me find it?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's on the application. And if you look on the front page of the application, it says to complete the application,
here it is, yes.
must be provided.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the section we put in there. And then Crystal had mentioned it a little more in depth in the ordinance. And so I didn't go into a ton of depth because that is also mentioned on the ordinance document.
So I guess my question is, if they get notice, do they have the opportunity for input? In a typical special hearing process, abutters would be able to have input into the decision.
So my understanding, Linda, is that these permits are through the Board of Health and would not be a city council special permit. They would just be a Board of Health application. And
but would you give the abutters input relative to your granting of a permit should that authority be put there?
What was discussed in the other hearings is just notice, but not approval. The idea was that you would be required to notice, but the only approval you would have to seek is of the property owner if you were a tenant. But we had not discussed requiring approval or input from abutters.
Right. So my point is, because we're in a public hearing and we're taking information in, we're not making decisions here yet, is that in a close living situation, I think the abutters need to be able to have input into the process if there are concerns from the abutters relative to the special permit. So that's just my perspective on it. Thank you.
I do think that I can't find it here so easily, but I thought that we were talking about in terms of the violations and like a hearing process. It might be here at the end here. There's a hearing. So I think that the abutters don't have the ability to object from the beginning. They don't have the ability to impact approval, but they have the ability to raise complaints. And those complaints would have to be within the ordinance and violations of the ordinance that we pass.
I would just suggest that that's late in the game because these are all people that live near each other. So it would seem prudent to have that input be at the front end. Thank you.
I think, there may be a way to, hear from abutters about their concerns, but I don't think that they can sort of veto the process. I think it can be brought into consideration by the Board of Health in their approval, but it's not like they get to object outright.
I'm asking for input from the abutters.
Mm-hmm. Sean, do you understand the sort of nuance that Councilor Vacon is adding here?
Yeah, I just think there would need to be clarity about what input, the finality of the input is. Is the input just that there is an ability for them to make public comment that we take under advisement? Or is there an expectation that there will be, I'm sure anybody who has the opportunity to comment, they may, and then if the ordinance is going to talk about that, or we can discuss in the public hearing, I'd just like to know what if we choose not to act on public comment for one reason or another, is that just the discretion of the Board of Health? I'd like a little bit more clarity about where that would be expected to go.
Yeah.
Through the chair, if I may, I would seek it to be similar to the special permit process that comes before the city council, so that any affected party has the opportunity to raise any concerns, problems, or questions that they may have relative to the issuing of the special permit, regardless of who's issuing it. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. And Christine, I think you're next, and then I see Councilor McGivern.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I'm going to apologize that I can't stay long. I have another meeting at 7:15. I have a couple of questions or statements to make. One is about the run and requiring of a run. Many people who have like smaller yards that are fenced in will have a chicken coop, but the run is their fenced in yard. A run is simply an area where the chickens can roam without getting into lots of trouble. A friend of mine has his coop in his fenced in yard, which is 1.25 acres, but they have no official run of a fenced in area to keep them out of the yard area. We have a run for our chickens that attaches to the coop. But I think that we need to differentiate between properties, because I see if you're in a large building and you want chickens, or even a multi-family home where you may want to have a specific fenced in area that is attached to the coop that the girls would come out of without being in the entire yard property. But I think that always requiring a run is going to be cost prohibitive to some people. And if they already, if they own their own home, or if their landlord is willing and it is a yard that is fenced in, there's absolutely no reason to have a separately constructed run. And we've raised chickens for 10 years here in Holyoke, in Rock Valley. not illegal chicken raising. Um, and also the statement about eggs must be kept at 45 degrees. If eggs are not washed, they do not have to be refrigerated and can be left at room temperature, even on your counter in your home, if you wash them before you use them. So, and a lot of people who raise chickens or have culturally raised chickens, it's pretty common knowledge. So I just would hesitate to have to put that in there, saying that they must be kept at 45 degrees. Some families may have very limited refrigeration, but like I said, if you don't wash them first, they don't have to be refrigerated and can be left at room temperature, save like super hot summer days. So that's that. Good luck.
Thanks for those comments, Christine. Councilor McGivern, and then is that your hand up again, Crystal?
Yes, please, when you get around to it.
Okay, sure. Councilor McGivern, Crystal, and then Sean again.
Thank you, Councilor. Just on the feedback from abutters, I've been getting a lot of negative feedback against this proposal, but I've told people it's going to be a case-by-case application process, a special permit, even through the Board of Health. But what I just heard from Sean makes no sense, because that's not meaningful feedback if abutters are just going to be able to complain after the fact. If we're not heading in a direction where we can make this a case-by-case special permits, that abutters can have meaningful feedback, it's not something that I'm prepared to vote for. I just want to state that up front, because I know this body has done a lot of work on this, a lot of good work. But there's a lot of people out there that are still naysayers and concerned about this.
Thank you. Crystal.
So going back to the run, I know there's a lot of setback requirements here as far as where the coop goes and how the run comes off of that. The other discrepancy we found is that the fencing, it states that if there's a roof, you only need a 4-foot surround with the run, but if there's no roof, you need a 6-foot surround. And I don't have it handy, but I do believe our fence ordinance in the city is only 4 feet. So are we going to have then 6-foot chicken wire fencing in the middle of properties to accommodate these the chicken coop and run situation? Or is that something we need to amend? And so then it speaks to kind of what the idea is for what that really looks like. I know in general, if you have a fenced in yard, it does sort of make sense that your chickens could roam. However, if you've got a fenced in yard next to an abutter and not a lot of land, and now your chickens are pecking through the fence or, close to your abutter, I don't know what the intention was as far as setbacks to keep things really on your property versus roaming and able to get up next to your abutters.
Yeah, I think it's a good point in terms of the fence height versus the run height, and I think that's going to need to be hammered out. I think some of those guidances came from Eric. Is Eric on the call? Okay, so perhaps Sean, you can talk with Eric, or maybe you have input yourself on how to resolve the fence height versus the run sort of discrepancy. And it doesn't have to happen, this evening. It's something that we could look at putting the two documents together again. But yeah, I mean, you're next in queue anyhow, so I'll turn it over to you, Sean.
Okay, I'll just be brief on a couple of things. The egg temperature, I just want to address that comment. That the egg temperature is only if you're distributing the eggs to the public. And I guess we can be a little more clear about that, but the 45 degrees is if you intend to give them away, like in a cooler at the end of your driveway, or some people build little, like a farm stand kind of thing. They give away eggs. That's what it's for. In your home, we're not going to make any determinations about how you store your eggs. It's only if you're distributing them to the public. And that falls under the food code. The run section, what Crystal was mentioning. So number 8 under the regulations says all outdoor roaming areas for hens shall be sufficiently enclosed and screened from the street and neighboring properties. So I think what that would mean is even if you were to use your fence as an outdoor area, you would still have to put something that would, even if it's just like the plastic slats that go into a chain link fence, there would still have to be some sufficient screening from the neighbors that wouldn't allow the chickens to pass through. And that would probably also help with some of the noise restrictions. And I think that some of that can be solved easily in the Board of Health Regulations section. We define run. It says run shall mean the enclosed outdoor space for hens. And if we want to discuss maybe tightening that language, that shall be separate from the from the main fence, I think that would be the easiest place to address that, is by clearing up what our definition of run is, if we're looking at direct solution. And then just the one last thing about the special permits, if we are going to set up a process where every property that's applying has to have like some form of a public hearing or input, we really do need to account for the fact that there is going to be what appears to be considerable demand for this property, and there's going to be a backlog of people who would then be entitled to hearings. So if we're going to set that up, it just there has to be an understanding that that's going to take some time to parse through multiple open hearings with comment, unless it's written comment only, and people are going to need to be patient while we process, a bunch of these all at once.
Thank you. I'll weigh in, and I'll see if Councilor McGivern wants to weigh in again. I don't expect the Board of Health to have a public hearing of sorts, but I do think that having the ability to receive meaningful input that can be taken under advisement, and there could be sort of like a comment period, and that's why the notification is important. So we could say, you're noticing on this day, and people that are noticed have, I don't know, whether it's 14 days or 20 days or something like that to comment before making a decision and giving approval. I agree that we're not in a position where the Board of Health can sort of have a hearing, and then also we don't want to give that approval power to abutters, but that neighborhood sort of input should be able to be taken into advisement. And there should be a limited number of days where you would have that comment period, and then otherwise, then you're just dealing with complaints thereafter and violations thereafter. Let's see. So Councilor Murphy seems to have his hand up, and then Councilor Vacon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree. Let me first say that I think the goal of what you're trying to do makes sense, but I do think I view this as changing what goes on in a zone that people purchase their property with. So I do think it is not only important that we get input, but I think it is important that that input be public and potentially have influence on whether or not a permit to have hens is granted. If this were, and in my ideal world, I was kind of thinking, I think if this were passed and we started to get neighborhoods saying, yes, this is fine, I'm okay with this on the property next to me, and things started to go and there were few problems, then I think that expanding that potentially could happen. But for me right now, if we were to say that this go, and certainly nothing against the Board of Health or Sean, but if we were just going to say that it's going to go there, and we just have to have a note that the neighbors have been told that we're going to have hens in our property, I would have serious reservations about creating this as a change in the zoning in terms of what's allowed. I also would have, and this is a question more than a comment, but so if I'm in an apartment unit that has 10 apartments, are those 10 units all allowed to have 6 hens or only one? And if so, how do we determine which one?
So I'll mention it. I don't know where it's in the ordinance directly in the documents. Either Sean or Crystal could help there. But we said that only one set of 6 hens to a coop on any particular property. So that's part of the reason why we wanted the abutters notification to happen, so that if there's multiple families that want to share in the keeping of hens, they may be able to do that, but it would still be the responsibility. Only one individual would have like their name and responsibility on the application, and then the responsibility for the care and taking of, at least from the legal end of it all, or the city and enforcement end of it all. One family would have that responsibility.
Yeah, and again, I'd have a little concern with that because again, having grown up in an apartment building where there were 8 units, and if we had a pretty good yard back then, and it would have been interesting if several families wanted to do it, and they could probably all have lived up to the dimensions. But if only one family was allowed, then those other 7 families are being denied the same opportunity, I assume, because they didn't come first. And I have some concern about one renter being able to do something and a renter in that same building not being able to do it. And that would also be a concern in terms of fairness. But I'm very, I think we need to be cautious in how we do this. If we're going to do it, we need to do it right. We need to build an experience that is good and showing abutters that what potential problems are out there. And I've heard the same concerns as Councilor McGivern and Councilor Vacon, that what's out there can be dealt with, and that you have a specific say in what's going to go on. And I would hope that the abutters have a specific and influential say in what goes on. Thank you.
I see Councilor Vacon again.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. If I remember correctly, I think I saw some feedback from TJ O'Connor relative to the chickens and how it might impact on them being called out. And I was wondering through the chair to Sean, what that would mean to the animal control officer from your perspective.
Well, it would be a lot of work. And honestly, that's something that we've discussed with TJO is, I think once we've gotten through the initial availability of this and dealt with the sudden influx of availability and possibilities, it would smooth out. But in the beginning, this is going to be quite a bit of work. I mean, every person who's applying, we have to review their application, a plot plan. We'd have to do a site walk. We'd have to have some form of a abutter input is what we're discussing here. And then we'd have to approve, have the coop constructed, re-inspect the coop, then allow the chickens to go out. And so that is going to be a ton of work for Eric. And obviously, when there's not a global pandemic, some of my other inspectors will have an opportunity to help as necessary, but right now it would be a significant usage of his time and resources. TJO separately, they are willing to help, and they do help in Chicopee, which is another neighboring community that has hens. But one of the issues that has arisen and has come up several times in the public hearing is when hens are removed, there is not a sufficient resource for placement of hens that are confiscated from properties, either can't have them or have too many or have roosters. And that's just sort of an issue with if we had a big influx of this, we don't have sufficient place other than euthanization to get rid of confiscated hens.
Right. And so one of our questions had been to get feedback from TJO as to what their experience has been in Chicopee and how many hens they've had to deal with because they have this ordinance in place. So did that information inform you in a way that made you feel it was workable, or that it was going to add a lot more need to be dealing with these hens in the community and then either having to have them euthanized or et cetera? So how it, in the feedback that they gave you, how much increase did you see in the experience they've had in Chicopee?
So their software, and I can forward that along. I thought I did, but their software is not
Did
able-
have it. I'm trying to understand what it would do to the workload in your office.
It would make a lot of work. There's no short way around that. Like I said, it's going, because you're adding a new dimension to what almost every residential zone in the city can have. It's going to create a lot of work. There's going to be hearings or appeals. There's going to be issues with neighbors. I think our biggest concern that's going to take up a lot of our time is multi-unit structures, and I had voiced some concern about that to begin with. That's a disagreement waiting to happen, and right. To sort of get to Councilor Murphy's point, one of the things I think we're going to deal with is it is going to be first come, first serve. And if you're in a 15 or a 20 unit apartment building, the only person who's going to make any decisions about who gets to have the chickens on the property is going to be the property owner. And one of our concerns is that what is the owner's involvement in that process actually going to look like, other than saying yes to the first person? And so I do think it is going to create a substantial amount of work, particularly in the beginning. It would be difficult to attribute to numbers, but it will take a lot of time with only one animal control officer on a daily basis.
So just one more follow-up, if the chair will indulge. So given the numbers that you looked at in a given year, would you see your animal control officer having to pick up 20, 50, 100 hens, or what, as a rough estimate?
That's difficult for me to speculate without knowing what the demand is going to be, and I really don't want to speculate. But I would say we pick up 20 or less chickens anyway, because people who are not supposed to have them do, and we take the chickens and surrender them to TJO. So I would say it's going to be above that, because we're probably taking a dozen or so hens a year anyway, and so we have slowed down on the confiscation of hens because it seems capricious to take them away right as we're in the process of approving regulations or ordinances that would allow them to then have the birds. And so we don't want to confiscate property only to say that they could have it back, but we've already not confiscated almost 10 animals in the time that these public comments have started to today.
Yeah. And so how many did they pick up in Chicopee?
I don't have that number on hand. I can look at it and I can get back to you.
All right. Thank you.
Let's see. I have in queue, I'm just going to go to, I don't even know what to call you anymore, Chair Regan. Eileen.
Well, thank you. I would like to try to ask everybody to remember when we first started having discussion about making ordinance so the amount of property needed to have backyard hens would be less. And if you'll recall, as I recall asking Mr. Gonzalez, or Mr. Gonsalves rather, if he felt that his department had adequate resources to enforce a new ordinance, which would involve the city having more chickens and more need to monitor the conditions and to enforce the ordinance. And I know, that until such time as he knew what it was going to look like, he couldn't really answer that question. But, and I'm neither opposed nor necessarily in favor of bringing down the amount of land needed to have backyard chickens. But I do suggest that the city council be advised to remember that we have lots and lots and lots of ordinances in this city, and we do not have the resources to enforce many of them. And this is regularly a problem with ordinances that we already have. So I hear Mr. Gonsalves saying that he doesn't feel that his department as it has adequate resources to monitor what we're proposing. And so I suggest that unless the city council is prepared to add more money to his budget the next time there's budget hearings, that we be very careful what we change this ordinance to.
Agreed.
So the two things that I'll just say in reaction to that comment is that number one, I think what we hear is that the Board of Health is already dealing with chickens as like an issue in the city, and it's because the regulations that we have a chicken ordinance, are excessively prohibitive. So he's doing more calls on complaints and non-compliance because we have a conservative chicken ordinance, which means he has to enforce more often. And then second of all, the other thing that I hear Sean saying, and he could clarify whether or not I'm hearing this correctly, is that it seems like it would be a lot of work up front because there would be the sort of approval process and then sort of getting the public neighbor input and then any sort of like hearings or complaints. But at some point, so like after the immediate sort of like, rush of applications and complaints, that workload should level out. So there will be sort of like a spike in activity around chickens, but at some point it'll level out. I have in queue Linda, Councilor Vacon. Are you still in?
I'm all set. Thank you. I'll lower my hand.
So then the other person I have is Sean. So I'm sure you could speak directly to the points that I just made. I actually, I want to put you on pause for just a second, Sean. I apologize. I just got a note saying folks are a bit confused about how to raise their hand in the Zoom meeting. I did enter just now instructions, and so anyone who needs to comment or wants to comment here would go to the bottom of their Zoom screen and look for participants. You click on participants, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, you should be able to see something that says raise hand, and then a blue hand will raise for me as the chair to look at. Thanks for being patient, Sean. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I would just also say, I think Cynthia Espinoza had requested to comment because her raise hand function isn't working. And I don't know if that was time sensitive. So if maybe she wants to go and then I'll respond.
Thank you. Go ahead. Cynthia, go ahead.
No, I think it has been somewhat answered, and also offering another hand to the Board of Health if they need any help with preparing for the influx or getting research done when it comes to neighbors complaint or permit process, that I'm here to assist.
And then Jeff Burkott, from RM40, which I believe is our largest density sort of zone, RM40, what's the next lowest? Or what's the next highest?
It's RM60, RM40, RM20.
RM60, RM40, RM20.
Right.
Thank you. So we may want to, and from 20, do we get down to 6 or something like that?
There's that RMLD, which is not currently used anywhere in the city, but it's like a 5-6 per acre zoning, and then after that it's R2.
Okay, so the we don't have anything for 4 or 6 units. It just goes right up to the 20.
Yeah, well, yeah, it goes from R2 to RMLD, and then it goes to RM20.
Okay, but the RMLV isn't presently in the city.
No one's using it, correct.
Okay, so I think that's something to figure out if at some point there is a cutoff. Taking into consideration some of the comments that have been made here about the anticipation of neighbor complaints. Perhaps we start with just the RM20 sort of blocks, which seems quite dense to begin with for this sort of use, and then see if there's success, and we could always amend the ordinance to include additional larger units. But it's something to take into advisement as the planning board drafts their recommendations to the ordinance committee. And then back to you, Sean, sorry.
Thanks. So I would say that it is difficult at this time for me to speculate what the workload is going to be, because that's sort of what this is. I do agree with your point that I do anticipate a large initial workload, but what I have heard from the counselors, and I have also heard from some other people when this was mentioned before, is that I do think that there is going to be some dissatisfaction with some of the neighbors around the keeping of livestock in residential areas, particularly close quarters or in multifamily properties. And perhaps we're addressing that through limiting some of the zone. And if those are going to amount to a lot of complaints as the number of chicken applications or hearings for, or, public comment period grows, I don't know how much work it's going to be, but it does have the potential to be a significant time, like a consumption of the animal control officer's time. Whereas to speak to your first part, yes, much of our enforcement right now is because of the restrictions, but that enforcement as it currently stands is very simple. If you're not in the zone, you can't have the hens. And so it's very straightforward. The actual enforcement process is not particularly time consuming. When you get into something that's as in-depth as this, the remediation of complaints, particularly when it comes down to an abutter making a specific comment or complaint about a specific aspect and then trying to fairly work that out with the tenant or property owner to address those concerns, is a much more complex set of circumstances and is going to be more time consuming, because you're going to have to hear from both sides, possibly have a hearing, come to an agreement. It's much more than, a yes or no question. Are you zoned for hens? Yes or no? Yes, you keep them. No, they go. So it's opening up a little bit of a Pandora's box as it comes to reasonable enforcement. And like I said, I'm not totally opposed to this, but I do think that it's going to create neighborly disputes, which we are with a lot of other aspects.
Thank you. I do want to note that Councilor Anderson Burgos has joined us. And then next in queue, I have an Andrea Court.
Hello. Thanks everyone for talking. Let's see. It sounds like there's going to be.
Yes, your name and address for the record.
Okay. Andrea Court, 173 Elm Street. So I guess I have a few things. I'm wondering if it would be possible for like some kind of like a separate party to be formed that could help deal with like the interpersonal issues that come up with this, so that the animal control officer doesn't have to deal with certain issues. If it could be more of like people who are more experienced with dealing with these kinds of situations, and then that party, maybe there's people in charge of that, they keep close communication with animal control and with Sean to make sure everything is smooth. But I think that would help free up some time for the animal control and for Sean, and it's in everybody's best interest, really. I think and if we have people that are trained to help deal with this and that have a lot of experience growing chickens, they can even help give advice about how to go about it and make it more amicable for everybody. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. I think that we have had different hearing boards that are made up of citizen volunteers. So the approval may happen on the Board of Health side, but perhaps there's a way for the hearing board to hear violations, and that's where they weigh the the violations that the neighbors and or the animal control officer are witnessing or raising as concerns, and then you know, there could be a different body that mediates the complaint, so that end of the workload is taken off of the Board of Health. And I think that I could talk with Sean when we review the two sets of ordinance and regulations to see if that might be something that makes sense, where we would have like an appointed, you know, hearing board of some sorts. Anyone else want to comment from the public or from either of the boards? Okay. So I think that we're at a point then where we can close the public hearing. We have heard a lot of public input. We have had the, you know, draft documents and comments on the draft documents here in open hearing. And I think at this point in time, there wouldn't be any new information presented. It would just be the sort of, to use Crystal or our legal counsel's words, a bit of finessing to make sure that the conflicts are eliminated and that the, you know, and ordinances really work hand in hand with one another. And I think that we heard that the redundancies are okay because it sort of hammers home the message about where and when things are going to be enforced, as well as how. But we might want to shift where some of the language sits in relation to the ordinance versus the Board of Health regulations. And then I think at the same time, we need the planning board to send us a recommendation on the zoning. So does anyone have any objection to closing the public hearing at this point in time? All right, so then I'll entertain a motion to do so.
Moved.
Motion has been made and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved.
Entertain a motion to close the public hearing as part of planning board.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll await your recommendation, planning board. Thanks for spending your time with us here this evening and over the past couple of weeks. And then once we get your recommendation, I think that we'll be able to work with the 3 official documents as a package in committee and send it out to the ordinance one way or another.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Is there a motion then to continue in order to item number 2?
So moved.
Motion has been made and seconded to continue a public hearing for a special permit application for Buudda Brothers LLC at 90 Sargent Street. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Okay, so I think what I heard earlier was that we have not received any, there's been no new planning review. So any sort of changes or updates that have been made to the proposed plan at 90 Sargent Street have not been received yet by the planning board and therefore have not been reviewed by the by the department and forwarded to us.
Good evening, everyone.
We have someone from Buudda Brothers here. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yes, this is John from Buudda Brothers. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Good. John, just name and address for the record.
Yes, it's 90 Sargent Street, Holyoke, Massachusetts.
Thank you.
So from my understanding, I believe Justin Pagan sent over all documentation to Ryan. They stated that they did receive it. And so it was noted to us that it should be handed in by Friday, which was. So I'm not too sure why was it that some parties never received it. We do have that email on file.
So I got good evening, everyone. I got an email from Brenna on Friday. She said that, thank you. I've passed it to Chair Lisi. Please let me know if you need any questions, Brenna.
Right, I see it. The only thing is I was under the impression that this is a copy of the same sort of information that you sent over to the planning department. Because the planning department has to complete the review.
Well, we didn't change the plans. I think on the planning department, what they told us was that they didn't see a waste area. So what we just highlight the like with the email that we sent to you guys saying that the waste area was shown in the plans that we originally sent. That was a change that we believe that we for the architect plans.
And there was some wording on the development impact statement that was changed and updated along with the traffic impact. So the traffic impact study was completely updated. It was from another party. So that was resubmitted. And I believe the document for phasing out the project was also submitted with that email.
So there were no actually changes updated to our architectural plans. It was just showing that we have a waste area that we already sent originally.
Sorry, I'm looking for this email.
No worries.
I see. Waste disposal, development impact statement, description of activity section, traffic impact statement, phasing out. Okay. So those are the documents that were shared. I do believe, however, that you know, I say this all the time, the city council is like a body of laymen. We're a body of citizens, and we're not in a position to make like technical reviews of what you submit. If Jeff is Jeff still on the call, or did he leave with the planning?
I believe he left with the planning board.
He left with the planning board because that's where he is tonight. Yeah, I'm going to say it's difficult for us to say whether or not they come into compliance with the ordinance, because it's really a review of our technical planning staff. And because I didn't get a paper copy of the last sort of set of reviews, I was anticipating a new review. I can't, let me see if I have something in my notes here. I don't think that we're in a position to sort of move forward without the planning review. So one big thing that I'm not sure is addressed in even these documents here. So although you said that there's no changes made to the plan, I think that we did request that the phasing out of the project be more detailed.
They did something with that.
Okay.
There was
Which
a three-part phase that they sent, phase 1 through.
I see it. Yeah. 3-part phase. So this is exactly the sort of thing that our planning staff would want to be able to look at, because again, when we approve the special permit, we move you forward and we lock in this document and say, this is the agreement that we have with you as the applicant. This is what we expect you to do. And again, as like a layman's board, just regular citizens that are representing, you know, the public here, we cannot make a sort of technical determination of this, whether this is, you know, satisfactory from a technical standpoint in terms of the details, you know, that would help us understand and anticipate what's happening on site from a planning perspective. Councilor Murphy, it seems like you want to speak. Councilor Vacon wants to speak.
Yeah, if I can, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank the gentleman. I met with them last, and with Preston, who's one of the businessmen that was at our last meeting, offering some concerns. And we met last Wednesday. We walked through the property. Preston is definitely okay with what's going on and all of the potential concerns. He's satisfied they've been addressed. I certainly view the property, and I am the last person. I mean, I know how to plug in an electrical outlet. That's about my capacity in that aspect. However, what they have there, and from what I worked with them, clearly the traffic impact for this will be, in terms of that location, will be very minimal. I mean, ideally, it'll be about 8 to 10 trips each shift, with 3 shifts potentially. They're going to start on the 3rd floor. third floor, and then develop down to the second floor, and then eventually down to the first floor. It is actually on Front Street. And as I looked at it, as this project goes along, I would hope that we actually put some parking on Front Street, which they could do and would not inhibit any of the traffic going through there, and would take the limited amount of traffic they have off Sargent Street and put it on Front Street. But if we can, like we did with 5 Appleton Street, where we had some concerns. Clearly, we've got 2.5 weeks before the next city council meeting, I believe, right? April 6th. I mean, not April 6th. October 6th. So, I mean, I would hope that we would try to, come back and have them come have an ordinance meeting like we did for the Appleton, 5 Appleton. Get planning board statements, make sure they're okay with this, get the engineer statement in terms of their being okay with this. I know these gentlemen are working hard to get things moving. And if we can do that so that potentially on October 6th, we can make a recommendation granting a special permit, I would appreciate that. And again, I think these young men are working hard to do whatever is necessary, just like they came up with these documents after the last meeting. They obviously, and they went out and hired an additional traffic control person to come and do another report because the initial report hadn't been approved. So, I mean, they're going above and beyond what is necessary, I think, to try to get our support. And I would hope that we can. And that if we don't, and my gut is that we aren't passing this tonight, that if we don't, that we would try to meet again prior to our meeting on October 6th, just to take this item up and review the planning department's comments and hopefully be able to pass the special permit on October 6th. So I would appreciate whatever we can do on that aspect, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Sure, and just to make clear, so we have 2.5 weeks before our next full city council meeting, which means that you wouldn't have a decision from the full city council until 2.5 weeks anyway. And so I think what we want to do is make sure that these documents get over to the planning staff and that they can review them and give us some opinion and guidance in advance of that next October 6th meeting, which means that we could meet in advance for a very brief period of time, hoping that everything's in order and everything has been addressed so that we could move it along to the full city council at that point in time. I do appreciate, I know that, the traffic impact statement is a new document that has the actual sort of, industry standards for the trips that are anticipated. And there's a lot of details and visuals here that I know are very appreciated. I do see now the phase plan. I'm a little bit skeptical about whether or not this is going to meet the, I guess the expectations of the planning staff. So just, heads up there, but I think what's most important is that we get it out in front of them and that they get to comment on it. Councilor Vacon.
Thank you. I was just wondering, are we sure that that never went to planning from the clerk? The communication that you have?
I will check back. So it's from Ryan to Brenna and then to me.
So it never went to planning from the clerk's office or Ryan?
No, but I think it should have been submitted to the planning department directly because it's not a new application. There's nothing for the clerk's department to process. It's already been reviewed once by the planning staff. And so any sort of amendments or changes or additional documents should go to the planning department and staff directly.
Well, I think it's unfortunate that that communication didn't get fully circulated, but I guess I would just echo Councilor Murphy's point that if those can be satisfactorily met with a letter updating the prior recommendations of the planning staff, because there don't appear to be any changes, that it wouldn't seem that it would need to be held up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Murphy, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, I just want to make sure for the Buudda brothers that they are aware that they want to make sure they get these documents to the planning department and make sure you are meeting with them prior to the next 2 weeks. Don't wait to that last couple of days. If you're not getting answers, make sure you're going out and pursuing them so that we have a very complete statement from the planning department so that we can take it up on October 6th. Thank you.
And then secondly, the other person who's important here is our city engineer, Bob Parent, and he wrote to me saying that he has not received anything from the applicant for the 90 Sargent Street project. So the documents that you submitted to our administrative assistant, Ryan, they really need to go to planning staff and to the engineer now that you have sort of initiated and started your application process. They're the sort of, you know, go-to and point people for you at this point in time. And then we're just reviewing we're reviewing their reviews. Does anybody else want to comment on this piece? Councilor Anderson Burgos, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm looking at these guys and I can't help but feel bad for, you know, here's a company who's coming to the city, and we have to find a way to make this more seamless, a little bit easier, because it seems like they're going from department to department, back and forth. We should come up with some kind of, maybe we could sit down and collectively work on something, maybe some kind of template, you know, check off this box. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this stuff? Just to make sure that I know this is a learning curve for everybody. This is something new, but we should really figure something out so that way future applicants that are coming into the city, we're not struggling to get them through.
Thank you. All right, so I think that at the end of the day here, what you have heard is that you're not sort of losing any time by taking until October 6th to really have the documents that you submitted reviewed and responded to. On your part, responding to those comments is going to be important before our next meeting on October 6th. So I think, Councilor Murphy, is that a motion that you'd like to make? That we continue the public hearing?
I'll make a motion. We continue the public hearing until 6:15 on October 6th.
We start at 7 for full council? Sure, 6:15 is great. The motion has been made and seconded to continue this public hearing until October 6th at 6:15 p.m. That gives us about a half an hour before the start of the full city council meeting to review the reviews of the planning department and the engineer on this project.
Can we just make sure that the applicants, if they have any questions about what we're trying to do here, or so that we're not going to be closing or suspending this until October 6th. I just want to make sure, Justin and Johnny, you guys all set, or?
Yeah, I think that we're fine. And forgive us for any type of miscommunication. I think we were under the impression that we were to send over those updated documents over to the city clerk. And then the city clerk was going to send it over to, I believe, Ryan, was it? And then Ryan was going to actually send out that email, or a mass send that email. So forgive us. If that was the case, we would have definitely sent it over to Jeff and Bob directly if we were under that impression, but we weren't.
Yeah, and likewise, I think, you know, I'm sorry that we couldn't offer more clarity in advance. Okay, so then that motion has been made and seconded. All in favor to continue to October 6th at 6:15 p.m.?
Aye.
Aye. So moved. Okay. I need Councilor Anderson Burgos to help me out here as the vice chair. I need to step out of the room for a moment. And we are up to item number 3 in the agenda. And again, I think what we heard from the planning staff is that we have not yet received any updated documents from 40 Lyman Street. So we have no additional review at this time. Excuse me, I will be right back.
Okay, so public hearing for Abbey Property Management, Inc. for a new special permit for a registered marijuana retail establishment, RMRE, at 40 Lyman Street, That's map 038 block 02 parcel 001.1.
Motion to take up item 3 and reopen the public hearing.
Second.
So move.
Continue it, I should say. All in favor? Aye. Okay.
You say continue, Linda?
Yes.
Linda, this is Greg Neffinger. I heard the chair say that no new documents have been presented, but in fact, we have new comments from the city engineer from our updated documents. So new documents have been submitted.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, through the chair, can the applicant present the documents to the committee so that they'll be in the public record, please?
That sounds like a plan. Yes, please, please do that.
So would you like me to share my screen? I can show you the updated site plan.
Yes, please.
Okay. I just have to, okay. So can you see the site plan there?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll use my pointer to show, well, basically the curb cut used to be in the center, and Bob Parent, the city engineer, said that the curb cut was too close to the proposed curb cut was too close to the corner. So we retained the existing curb cut, but made it a little bit wider to facilitate cars going in and out. Then we redesigned the parking lot, and Jeff Burkott and Bob Parent both have this plan and commented on it. And we show 6 parking spots with a handicap parking spot with a bike rack. And we show the dumpster down here on the lower part. Bob Parent, in his first set of comments, asked for landscaping. So this hatched area along the perimeter here and here, we show perennial flowers and hemlock ground cover or mulch. And also we show here, this note here, the 4-foot high vinyl coated chain link fence. So it's not going to be the galvanized type. And along the neighbor's side, we're showing a 6-foot high solid vinyl fence, and the same fence will surround the dumpster also. And those are all according to the zoning bylaws. And so we also in the center show a catch basin, and I've done a lot of parking lots about this size, and the catch basins are just a precast concrete structure with gravel around it, with a metal grate on the top of it, and it just holds the water until it can percolate into the soil. That exact size will be determined by a civil engineer, which we will, and Bob Parent and his second set of comments said that will have to be approved by the city engineer, and the curb cut will have to be approved by the city engineer. And so so the comments from Mr. Parent, and I'll read them to you. The city council could address information by conditioning a special permit on receipt of these approvals. So we know that we'll have to get a permit for the curb cut, and we know we're going to have to get a building permit for renovating the building, and we'll have to get a permit for the catch basin. So all those come later, and these are the things that were requested by Bob Parent. And one other thing is he recommends that the council require the applicant to replace the sidewalk and upgrade along New Bridge Street, which we're more than happy to do. Right now it's partially asphalt. So we would take up that sidewalk and we would make it all concrete. And then Then the third comment from Mr. Parent was about the lighting levels, and that's on a different plan, which I can show you. These are the lighting levels. You see all these numbers on the plan. So we show various lights A, and A here, and you can see it's 2.3 right here, but yet it falls off very quickly. And these are the type of lights that we've chosen. They don't shine out, they shine only down, and the light falls off very quickly, so you don't have much light spilling away from the property. And we show 2 poles here, but they're only 15 feet high, one there and one there. And again, the light is shining down, and they're not very high, about as high as the other ones that are attached to the building. And the same thing at the entry and exit, you can see where the light is 5 and 8, but once you get about 10 feet away, it falls off to 2 and 3 foot candles, which is really. And Bob asked that the average lighting be below 3 foot candles. So it falls off very quickly. It's only shining down right at the entries. So, and that's, and then other comments he had was about joining the 2 lots together, which I can bring up. The surveyor, this is the surveyor's drawing here, which shows the 2 lots being joined together. And it's called an A&R application, and we're prepared to do the full A&R application, but this is the beginning of it. And you see the surveyor has a standard language here for the beginning of combining the 2 lots together. So, these were submitted on Friday, and they were printed out yesterday, I believe, and given to the clerk. Yeah, so let me see if there's and this is from Mr. Parent's September 20th comments. And he talked about submitting a traffic study, which is more of a continuation, not, his comment was, as the industry grows, they would like to know, how parking and things can be mitigated. But we did submit a traffic engineer's report with our application, and that's it. So I guess to kind of complete, everything I just said, is that if you were to approve this, to send it along to the city council for the next city council meeting, which I guess is in 2.5 weeks, that we still have to get other permits anyways. Like, as I said, we still have to get a building permit, so it'd be subject to a building permit. We still have to get a curb cut permit, and we still have to get the site drainage permit. So, and at that time, the city engineer and the planner, the planner mentioned verbally that he'd like to see the 4-foot fence, which I'll bring back up here. The 4-foot fence along North Bridge Street and Lyman Street be increased to 6 feet, which we have no problem doing that, but zoning bylaws only allow a 4-foot high fence, and we'd have to get a special permit for a 6-foot high fence, and we'd be happy to do that also. So, so we need to, if we continue with that, we would have to get the 4-foot high special permit, the engineer's approval for the catch basin, the engineer's approval for the curb cut, and of course a building permit. So we're requesting that you would vote in favor of this today to move it along to the city council.
So is there anybody else from the public that would like to speak on this matter, on this order?
Mr. Counselor, my name is Brian Shea. I'm the attorney who actually represents Abbey Property Management.
Sure.
And the only thing I was just going to add is that I have a copy of Mr. Parent's letter, if you'd like me to share it through the screen. It's dated September 20th. I received it on Sunday. It does repeat a lot of the things that Mr. Neffinger just said, and they all appear to, anything that needs to be done can be conditioned upon the issuance of the special permit. The only other thing I'd like to offer is that our organization did speak with Jeff Burkott this afternoon. He had a couple comments, both of which were addressed by Mr. Neffinger. One was the size of the fence, and one just a revision of the lighting plan. He described those, and I'm not categorizing this, he categorized them as being minor issues that we could address, again, over the next couple of weeks is in anticipation of moving forward before the city council.
Mr.
Linda, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to do it right and raise my hand.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think in keeping with how we've handled these in the past, when we get to this point and there's some limited remaining things, we have tended to recommend approval of the special permit and reference the letter of September 20th with the remaining open items to be brought into compliance and proper permits sought as a condition in the granting of the special permit. So I would feel comfortable to make a motion to do that if we put in all of our standard conditions and then add to it that the recommendations of the engineer in the letter of September 20th and the outstanding fence height questions from planning have the proper permits sought and be remedied prior to the issuing of the special permit. If anybody else hears anything I missed, please jump in.
Linda, do you have the special conditions in front of you? Just because I came back from an emergency and I don't have anything in front of me that we might have to read into the record if it's appropriate.
If you hang on, I think I can get them. Just give me a minute.
Of course. I just rather have them read it into the hearing.
Could I just ask how many parking spots?
Yes, we're showing 6 parking spots.
Okay, on site?
On site, yes.
Okay, and how many employees do they expect, do you know?
I'm sorry, I know it's in the application, but I've dealt more with the architectural part of it. I believe there may be 2 or 3 employees. I'm not sure, and I don't know if Brian Shea has that number off the top of his head.
I don't have that number. Sorry, off the top of my head, Mr. Effinger, no. But Mr. Murphy, if it's an issue as far as parking, to make sure that I'm sure that the applicant could arrange for the employees to not park on site to allow public parking.
Okay. Because that's a pretty heavily, Lyman Street seems like it's got a lot of traffic. North Bridge doesn't seem like that much, but Lyman Street seems like it's got a lot of traffic going up and down. I don't know. But I know when I drive there, it always seems like there's a lot of cars coming up and down. So I'm assuming they're parking, most people would park in the even customers would park in the parking lot.
There appears to be a sufficient off-street parking in the general area of this particular property.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Linda?
Okay, Counselor, I have found the list.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So number 1 as a condition would be that the owner of the building always pay commercial property tax rate to the extent allowed by federal, state, and local laws for the duration of the special permit. 2, that the business retain a minimum of 30% Holyoke residents for non-security jobs. 3, that hiring preference be given to security personnel that are retired Holyoke police or are a retired member of another police department now living in the city of Holyoke. 4, there shall be no marijuana consumption to be allowed on site. 5, there shall be no deliveries of retail or medical marijuana from the site to individual homes, residences, or people. 6, that the hours of operation be in compliance with the city ordinances, which currently limit hours and days of operation. And 7 would be what we spoke about earlier, that all recommendations from the Office of Planning and Economic Development and the city engineer be complied with. And we might want to specifically reference the September 20th letter and any other communications.
I'll second that.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye. Oh, sorry.
And how it goes, Linda? Aye.
I didn't think there was any further discussion on the motion.
Oh,
So I guess this will be sent to city council on the 10th or on the 6th, sorry, right?
Yep.
October 6th, right. So the motion passes 4-0, with the chair being recessed from the meeting.
Thank you very much. We appreciate all your time.
Okay, thank
Very
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll entertain a motion to take up item number 4.
So,
Okay, so item number 4 is
aye.
is from Linda Vacon. Let's see, March 10th. Ordered that any transfers from personal budget lines to overtime, item 51300-51399, require approval by the city council.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
If I could just give a brief overview.
Of course.
This is simply an amendment to a current ordinance that we passed a while ago. And it was recognized that we didn't quite capture all of the personnel lines when we initially crafted it. So what we need to do, this came to us with unanimous recommendation to adopt and amend the ordinance from the Finance Committee to ordinance so that we can put it in the proper form. So I would ask the committee to recommend to the council that also that we send it to legal to give us the amended language for the next city council meeting so that we can recommend it to the council to amend the ordinance at the October 6th meeting. If that's good with the committee.
I'll second that.
So moved.
Go
ahead.
Just okay. Thank you. And I'm pretty much in favor of this. So I just want to make sure. So are we talking that any department that is going to take from administrator 1 and they're going to take money from that to pay overtime for someone would come, it wouldn't be a financial transfer, or would it? Are you?
Yeah.
So it would have to come from the mayor first then, right?
So all of those transfers that we're seeing before us,
Yeah.
it was added to those. Whereas right now it's just happening in the department or separately.
Okay. I mean, I think there's a lot of merit in this, especially from the aspect of the city council getting an understanding of why so much overtime is taking place. And I think that's a very valid argument. I just, having seen some of the overtimes, I just wonder how many more transfers that would be. And then the other question would be, as something comes up, if there was an emergency and someone didn't have it, they would not be able to hire, they wouldn't be able to hire somebody on overtime without going through this process. And I'm just wondering if there are certain circumstances where we might waive this only because of an emergency. And I don't know how we would do that, but that's my concern. There's sometimes things can come up, and if we can't transfer that money to pay the overtime, then are they allowed to have someone work overtime without the funds there? And I would think the answer is no.
If I make the chair.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm back and resuming my duties. Thank you for chairing Councilor Anderson Burgos.
So in a situation like that, the department head through the mayor can always come to seek a transfer directly into overtime from free cash or some other avenue. So they know what's available to them in a case where they can anticipate their staffing needs, because we see with their transfers and injured on duty, you know, what those are the kinds of things that are driving the overtime. I think certainly if there was citywide emergency, we would be in a complete emergency situation that would be greater than this particular issue.
Okay.
Councilor Libby Hernandez.
If I may, Chair, address Councilor Vacon so my question is, Councilor Vacon, so now all those transfers that we see are taking place without like prior approval, and then we vote on them after it takes place? Is that how it's happening now?
Through the chair, as it's happening now, there is no knowledge or approval by the city council until later on we're able to look back to see where it came from and why it happened. And this is an effort to have transparency in what is going on with the transfers from budgeted approved lines and the overtime, so that we will be able to see it.
And then with permission to the chair, once again, if I can address Ms. Bacon and Councilor Murphy. So what Councilor Murphy brought up, does that mean like if there's an emergency and if we do pass this, is that gonna like disable any efforts of taking place because this is not approved first by us? Can you guys develop in that a little bit, like clarify that?
So through the chair, if there was a citywide emergency, then there would be the ability on the part of the mayor and or the president of the city council to call a meeting to approve any needed and unanticipated financial transfers. This would not disrupt the operation of the city.
Like they can do that meeting like on the spot when the issue is taking place?
They have to do 48-hour notice in terms
Oh,
of posting a meeting, but an emergency meeting can be called.
okay. Thank you.
So I have just one, I guess I have two questions. So the first question is, why were these handful of line items excluded from the original ordinance that we passed?
As I'm understanding it, it was just an oversight. The intention was that all personnel lines would be included.
And so we just didn't actually call them out when we drafted
We
the
didn't
ordinance?
go far enough in the item numbers of the general ledger.
Okay. So that's that. And then second of all, I mean, the way that I understand, and I do hear the concerns that Councilor Murphy raised, but I think that, you know, it's like we would be able to appropriate, you know, X amount of dollars for overtime. And then as the chief was running down that account, you know, we would hope that the chief or whoever's doing, you know, budgeting would say, okay, overtime account is running down. I have to go back to the council and say, for the next quarter, I would anticipate this much more overtime. So I don't think we ever get to a point where we run out of overtime dollars. It's just how quickly are we going through it? And then I think, you know, others have raised the point that we get to understand, like, why are we running through it at the rate with which we are?
Right. And this points to the circumstance where the budgeted overtime has been used. And so then the department heads are wanting to transfer other monies within the budget into it. So it's not the kind of thing that's done in an emergency. It's the kind of thing that's done as they see it, to Councilor Lisi's point, declining. It's just so we know where it's coming from.
Yeah, it doesn't halt operations. I think even if you know the money wasn't there, it wouldn't halt operations. It would just mean that we'd have to make sure that the money was in there for the next payroll, which would be, you know, 2 weeks from that point in time.
Right.
Go ahead, Councilor Murphy.
Yeah, I just and again, I'm certainly not a financial legal expert here, but it would seem to me that if in fact, and again, I think the idea that there's potentially an emergency is very, I mean, I just put it out there because that's the only thing I think about this that has a negative, if there is a negative. But if we do not have money in an overtime account, I don't think legally a department head could anticipate that they're going to get money in that overtime account and spend it legally. I mean, I could be wrong, but I would think they're not authorized to spend money for things that they don't have in anticipation that they're going to get them. And again, I could be wrong. I don't know if the city solicitor.
I thought that Councilor McKibben would raise his hand and give us some insight. I think technically you're right, and I think that we could also, build into the ordinance, like, some sort of exemption if we felt that that's necessary. But I think Councilor McKibben might have some more information for us to work with here. So, Councilor McKibben.
Thank you, Councilor. As you said, the Finance Committee did recommend that the Ordinance Committee look at putting this into ordinance form after some discussion. I think the points here are clear tonight. And going back to what Linda Vacon said about this was kind of left out because we didn't want to completely micromanage department heads when it came time to a budget. Prior to this ordinance being adopted, the department head, with the approval of the mayor, could transfer any money within a category from one line item to another during the course of the fiscal year without coming back to the city council. No money can be spent without city council approval. It's the transfers that we're talking about. Unfortunately, what we found out over the years is transfers are made for good reasons and transfers are made sometimes for less than good reasons. And what we found out last year was we saw money being taken out of the overtime accounts, put into personnel items that were needed, and then later department heads coming in and asking for more overtime money. I mean, maybe it's legit, maybe there were reasons, but those are the issues that we need to see in front of us as they happen. Councilor Murphy makes a great point about emergencies, but emergencies can happen in any line item, whether it's a transfer or not. Department heads, with the help of the auditor and the chief financial officer being the mayor, should be on top of that weekly to avoid emergencies and be able to put those requests before us in a timely fashion. I don't think we're asking a lot, but I think what we're asking is to be involved and to keep people in checks, which is our job, the check and balance part of being a city councilor. I don't know if that's helpful, Councilor, but I hope it answers some questions.
Thank you.
Is there any other comment then? I would say that we could entertain a motion then to have this drafted into legal form and then forward to the full city council for our next full meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That concludes our agenda. Because I had to step out and take care of my little guy, what was the outcome on item number 3?
It passed.
What, you want me to answer her?
It passed? It passed?
No.
So we passed it 4-0 with the standard conditions.
So despite the fact that we didn't get any further review from the planning department, we were—
Well, he had the letter and he had the updates and that he provided on the screen to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so we approved it conditional upon meeting the September 20th letter and requirements from the planning department, as we have with many others.
Sure. I think, however, that the planning department, because they haven't been able to review their new submission that came in on the 18th.
Not sure about that.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is they haven't, so in Bob's letter, Bob says that they received communication for plans dated September 18th, and that Bob's comments were relative to that plan. But the only planning department comments that we have are still on the first draft that was submitted. I don't know what the date of that original draft was, but that they were supposed to do a full sort of, resubmit their plans altogether. They submitted on the 18th, and planning has not yet reviewed those new plans. So,
well, he presented them to the committee tonight, in the revised form, having walked through with the engineer and met the requirements of the engineer's letter. And so we stipulated that by the time of the city council meeting, that he would be in compliance with that letter. So there'd be 2.5 weeks where they can come in, and it looked like everything in the letter had been answered, but just in case anything hadn't, we included those in the conditions. So hopefully they would be done in 2.5 weeks. But anyway, that's the way it went.
Right. I guess just to be really clear, so I guess I need some help from our legal counsel. Legal, can we suspend the necessary rules and have our legal approach?
So moved.
Move. Second.
Crystal, thank you. So given the disposition of the order, which was that they comply with all the requirements of the engineer and the planning department, I think that's how the disposition was worded. Considering that the project required a resubmission of plans, which were received on the 18th, and that they have not been reviewed by the planning department yet, would the motion on the disposition still apply to any additional review of the planning department, or would it apply only to the original review?
Generally, we like to have a full submission before we finalize anything. So I don't know if the original motion was just premature, or normally when we do these kind of motions, you'll all say that you have to comply with the letter, by the time that the council meeting rolls around, but that's usually at the very end when everyone has had a chance to review it. So I think we definitely want to see a full submission and have all the departments able to review and provide their input, and then have the stipulation that they would comply with whatever is stated, because we just don't know if, you can always send it to council the way it is, and council can always continue it another night as well, but committees generally like to handle all the minute details. So it's really up to the committee whether you want to handle it here or you want the council to try and handle it, but they may say that they wanted the committee to really finalize those details. Really,
I guess I'll ask.
There's no legal ramification here. It's really who wants to deal with the conversation.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure that if planning department does submit new sort of comments or a new review, that the applicant would be in some way bound by our disposition to that new set of comments as opposed to the previous set of comments. I guess that's my main concern here.
Okay, so hang on a second. So the way that the condition read was that all recommendations from the Office of Planning and Economic Development and the city engineer be complied with.
Okay, so if we pass it on the 6th, any new sort of comments and review,
they're going to have to comply
with there. Okay, that's fine. So really, at the detriment, we're binding ourselves to some sort of past.
It's really at the detriment of the applicant here, because they've now agreed to comply with whatever might come out of the new submission. But
right, because he did stipulate that he had gone over all of it with the engineer. So
the engineer is only half the equation.
So, well, for the portions that were remaining in question relative to the special permit. So they stipulated to it, so.
Okay, I just, again, wanted to make sure that we weren't binding ourselves to a past review, and that there was an ability to have the new review included in the conditions. And it seems that there is. Okay. All right, then. Thank you for bearing with me as we got clarification there. I think a motion to adjourn is in order. Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned. We have no meeting on the 29th of this month, and we will be meeting next in the second week of October. Thank you.